The sun was setting, painting the Austin suburbs a golden glow, when Mark Thompson pulled his truck into the driveway of his home on Westgate Drive. The engine cut out with a familiar rumble, and Mark wiped the sweat from his brow, feeling his shirt stick to his back from a day at the construction site. He was a civil engineer, 38, and he'd spent 10 hours today reviewing plans for a new bridge over the Colorado River. All he wanted was a cold beer, dinner with the kids, and maybe a quiet half-hour in front of the TV. He grabbed his backpack, got out of the car, and inhaled the smell of freshly cut grass his neighbor, Mr. Kelly, was mowing again. The house greeted him with a familiar bustle. Leela's bike was on the porch, a pair of Noah's sneakers were in the entryway, and the TV was blaring from the living room. Mark tossed his keys on the wooden table, pulled off his shoes, and walked into the kitchen, where Emily's phone was sitting on the marble counter. The screen blinked with a notification. Mark glanced at it, expecting to see the name of Claire, Emily's sister, who was always sending her silly memes or pictures of her 2-year-old son. Instead, the screen read Ryan, and the text, "That's what you're missing, Em." A photo was attached to the message. Mark frowned, feeling a small twinge of worry. Ryan. He vaguely remembered Emily mentioning a colleague from the startup where she worked as a project manager, some developer, he thought. But why was he texting her in the evening? And what was this missing out? Curiosity mixed with worry, and Mark picked up his phone. Emily was in the shower. He could hear her humming an old Taylor Swift song, her voice coming through the closed door of the upstairs bathroom. The phone was warm, as if Emily had just dropped it before leaving. Mark typed in the password 0712, their wedding date, and the screen unlocked. He opened the message, and his breath hitched. The photo from Ryan was a selfie, a guy with dark curls, a confident grin, and a bare chest, clearly proud of his toned body. Mark swallowed, feeling the blood rush to his temples. His fingers, almost against his will, scrolled up the chat, and each message was like a punch to the gut. Ryan, Emily, come see me after work. Emily, Ryan, you know I can't. Ryan, come on, make up an excuse. Tell Mark you're running late. Emily, why should I take the risk? Ryan, for a night you'll never forget. Emily, you are too self-confident. Empty words. Ryan, want to argue. There's only one way to find out. Mark reread the lines, his fingers gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. He scrolled through the messages, seeing them go back weeks. They were playful, flirtatious, with innuendo that grew more explicit. Emily, his Emily, the mother of their children, Leela, 9, and Noah, 6, was flirting with Ryan. His mind refused to accept it. He sat down on a chair at the kitchen island, staring at the screen as if it could explain how his world had turned upside down in a minute. Daddy, Leela's clear voice broke into his thoughts. She flew into the kitchen, her blonde hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, her unicorn pajamas hanging off her skinny shoulders. You promised to read about dinosaurs. Mark quickly turned off his phone screen, forcing a smile. His heart was pounding, but he didn't want his daughter to notice. Of course, honey. Where's Noah? Building a pillow fort, Leela rolled her eyes, as if her 6-year-old brother's behavior was a personal test. He said dinosaurs were for little kids. Well, he'll change his mind, Mark patted her head, trying to keep his voice even. Go get the book, I'll be right there. Leela ran away, her footsteps pounding the stairs. Mark looked at his phone again, his fingers shaking. He opened the conversation again, hoping it was a mistake, a joke, anything. But there was another message from yesterday, Emily. You're so confident, Ryan. Do you think I'm that simple? And the answer, Ryan, not simple, but special. Just give me a chance to prove it. Mark dropped the phone on the table as if it had burned his hands. His stomach twisted, and he clenched his fists, imagining himself punching this Ryan, whoever he was. He remembered Emily staying late at work a few weeks ago, saying they had a pressing deadline on a project. He'd shrugged it off, ordered pizza so she wouldn't have to cook when she got back. Now he felt like a complete idiot. Maybe she was with Ryan. Maybe it was more than just words. Don't forget to like and subscribe. For you, a button is a moment. For the channel, a step forward. Returning to history. He stood up, walked over to the fridge, and opened the door, but instead of grabbing a beer, he just stared at the shelves. There was a family photo stuck to it with a magnet. The four of them on a picnic at Lake Travis, Leela with ice cream on her cheek, Noah with a toy tractor, Emily laughing, his arm around her waist. Mark felt a lump in his throat. He remembered the first time they met at the SXSW Music Festival, Emily dancing to a local indie band in jean shorts and holding a beer. He'd thought she was too good for him, smart, beautiful, with a sparkle in her eye. And now that spark seemed to be burning for someone else. The sound of the running water in the upstairs bathroom faded, and Mark heard Emily humming as she turned off the shower. She'd be down soon. What was he going to say? How could he even talk to a wife who might be cheating? He picked up his phone again, scrolling through his messages, trying to find one line that would deny his worst fears. But all he saw were her words, teasing, playful, like she was enjoying it. He remembered their wedding, the way she'd looked at him as they danced to an old Frank Sinatra song. 12 years, 2 kids, countless nights of pizza and movies, it all seemed like a lie now. "Daddy, are you coming?" Leela reappeared in the doorway, holding a book about dinosaurs. Her eyes were full of anticipation, but Mark noticed a hint of worry in them. She was always sensitive, as if she could sense when something was wrong. "Yeah, I'm coming," he said, putting the phone in his pocket. "Give me a minute, okay?" Leela nodded and left, and Mark leaned against the counter, trying to collect his thoughts. His hands were still shaking, and there were tears in his eyes that he didn't want to let go. He didn't know how to greet Emily when she came down. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but at the same time, he was afraid to hear the truth. What if she really wanted this Ryan? What if their marriage was just a habit she was tired of? He walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and stared at the dark TV screen. His face was reflected there, tired, with dark circles under his eyes. He felt his world, so familiar and warm, crumbling. He wanted to believe that Emily was the same as always, but every word she said in those texts sounded like a lie. He clenched his fists, trying to suppress the anger that threatened to burst out. Emily's footsteps came up the stairs, and Mark knew that everything was about to change. He didn't know how to start this conversation, but he knew he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen anything. Emily walked down the stairs, her bare feet padding softly on the wooden steps, the tune she'd been humming in the shower still playing in her head. She was wrapped in a white towel, her wet hair stuck to her shoulders, and she felt a little tired after a long day at the startup. The new app launch project was in full swing, and she'd spent the morning putting out fires between developers and designers. All she wanted to do was put on her pajamas, pour a glass of wine, and maybe talk Mark into watching something light on Netflix. But when she walked into the kitchen, her heart sank. Mark stood at the kitchen island, clutching her phone. His face was pale, his eyes were bright, and his jaw was so tense that Emily knew something was wrong. She paused in the doorway, her hand instinctively reaching for the towel, as if it could protect her from what was about to happen. "Mark." Her voice was quiet, almost scared. "What are you doing with my phone?" Mark looked up, and his gaze was like a blow. "Who's Ryan?" he asked, his voice cold but trembling with barely contained fury. He turned the phone toward her, the screen still glowing with an open text message. "And why is he sending you pictures like that, Em?" Emily felt the blood drain from her face. Her eyes darted to her phone, and she recognized the text, the one from Ryan with his stupid selfie. She hadn't opened it since she dropped it before the shower, but now she knew what it looked like. Her mind spun, trying to find words, but all she could do was stand frozen under Mark's gaze. It's, it's not what you think," she began, her voice shaking. "It's just stupid, Mark. Nothing serious." "Nothing serious." Mark stepped closer, his voice growing louder. He scrolled the screen and began reading aloud, each word an accusation. "Stop by my place after work, Emily. Make up an excuse for Mark. Am I just an obstacle to your plans now?" "No, Mark, no." Emily raised her hands, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not like that. I never. I never intended to go to him. It's just words, just a joke. A joke? Mark chuckled, but there was nothing funny about it. He showed her his phone again, where there was a photo of Ryan shirtless with that smug grin of his. Is this a joke? He sends you pictures like that, and you, what, laugh at it? Respond to him, tease him. Emily shook her head, tears starting to fall onto the floor. I didn't ask him to send that, Mark. I swear. I don't know why he did it. It was too much, and I was going to tell him to stop. Were you planning to? Mark threw the phone on the table, and it landed with a thud next to Leela's bowl of half-eaten cereal. And before that, you were just having fun, right? Texting him that he was too cocky, but you kept going. Why, Emily? Why do you need this? Emily opened her mouth, but the words stuck. She felt her chest tighten, like she couldn't breathe. She wanted to explain that it was just flirting, a way to feel alive, wanted, but the words sounded stupid even in her head. How could she tell Mark that she sometimes felt invisible in their marriage? That after Leela and Noah were born, she wasn't the girl who danced in the rain at SXSW. I don't know how to explain, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was wrong, I know. But I love you, Mark. You and the kids are everything to me. Do you love me? Mark stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Then why are you texting this Ryan guy that he can give you a night you'll never forget? Why are you playing along, Emily? Do you want him? No, she cried, her voice breaking. I don't want him. I never wanted him. It was just stupid, Mark. I didn't mean to do anything, I swear. Mark looked at her, his face a mixture of pain and disbelief. He wanted to believe her, but every word of the text he read was like a knife in the back. He remembered how she had come home late a couple of days ago, laughing that the team had screwed up again. He had warmed up her dinner, kissed her forehead, not even suspecting that she might have been texting this Ryan guy on the way home. Do you even realize what this looks like? He said, his voice quieter, but so hurt that Emily flinched. I'm sitting here, reading about you flirting with another guy, and he's sending you pictures of his body. And you're telling me it's nothing serious. Emily buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I didn't ask him to send that, she repeated, her voice muffled. I didn't mean to. I was just being stupid. I'm sorry, Mark. Please. Mark looked at her, trying to find the Emily he knew in her face. The one who laughed at his stupid jokes. The one who held his hand as they watched Noah take his first steps. But here was a woman who seemed to be searching for something he couldn't give her. He wanted to hug her, to tell her everything would be okay, but the anger and pain were too strong. Daddy? Leela's weak voice came from the hallway. She was standing in the doorway, clutching a book about dinosaurs, her eyes full of worry. Why are you shouting? Mark froze, his anger seemingly switched off. Emily quickly wiped away her tears and forced a smile, even though her face was wet. It's okay, honey, she said, her voice shaking. We're just talking. Go ahead, I'll be right there. Leela looked at them doubtfully, her gaze darting from Mark to Emily. You're not arguing? She asked quietly. No, honey, Emily came up to her, squatting down. It's just that grown-ups talk loudly sometimes. Go ahead, I'll be there soon, okay? Leela nodded, but her eyes were still wary. She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Emily stood up, looking at Mark, her face full of despair. Mark, please, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Let's talk calmly. I don't want the children to hear this. Talk. Mark shook his head, his voice full of bitterness. Do you seriously think I can talk calmly after this? He pointed to the phone lying on the table. I don't know who you are now, Emily. I don't know what you do when you say you're at work. And I don't know how I'm supposed to trust you now. Emily whimpered, her hands shaking as she reached for the towel again, as if it could keep her from falling apart. I'm your wife, she said, her voice thick with pain. I made a mistake, but I didn't cheat on you. Please, Mark, give me a chance to explain. Mark looked at her, his chest heaving. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but Leela's presence reminded him that their children were more than just a backdrop to their lives. He couldn't let this conversation ruin everything right now. He turned, heading for the stairs, his steps heavy. "I need time," he said without turning around. "Leave me alone, Emily." She called him, her voice full of tears, but Mark did not stop. He went up to the bedroom, closed the door. The silence in the bedroom was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioner and the occasional sound of traffic outside. Mark Thompson sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the dark screen of the television, which reflected his silhouette hunched over, hair disheveled, shoulders tense. His hands were still shaking, though he clenched them into fists, trying to calm the storm inside him. Emily's phone was downstairs on the kitchen table, but every word of her text conversation with Ryan was seared into his brain. He felt as if someone had ripped a chunk out of his chest, leaving a void he didn't know how to fill. He lay down on his bed without undressing, not even taking off his socks. The blanket Emily had tucked in neatly that morning was still untouched. He stared at the ceiling, where the faint light from the street lamp cast shadows through the blinds. Usually these nights were his refuge. After a long day at the construction site, after playing with Leela and Noah, after dinner with Emily, chatting about trivia or laughing at something silly on TV. But tonight the bedroom felt foreign, like he was in a house that no longer belonged to him. Mark closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, memories played in his head, vivid as stills from an old movie. He remembered the first time he and Emily met at the SXSW Festival in Austin 12 years ago. She was standing at the front of the stage, wearing jean shorts and a white tank top, holding a beer, dancing to a local indie band. Her blonde hair was flying, and her laugh was so infectious that Mark, then an insecure engineer with a silly haircut, couldn't look away. He walked over, started talking, and somehow she gave him her number. He still couldn't figure out how he'd gotten so lucky. Then there were other memories. Their wedding, when Emily looked more beautiful than any of the models in the magazines in a simple white dress. Leela's birth, when he held her tiny body and cried with happiness. Noah's birth, when Emily, tired after giving birth, still smiled at him as if he were her world. Cozy evenings with pizza, when Leela drew on the box with markers and Noah built towers out of the crusts. These moments were the foundation of their life, their marriage. But now it all seemed fragile, like glass ready to shatter with one wrong move. Mark rolled over onto his side, his gaze falling on the empty half of the bed Emily's side. She always slept closer to the window because she liked the morning light to wake her. Now the sheets were cold, without her warmth. He knew she was down on the couch, probably still crying from their fight. Part of him wanted to go down there, hug her, tell her they'd work it out. But the other part, the part that had seen Ryan's texts, was seething with anger. How could she? Why was she looking for attention from some smug jerk when she had him? "Shit," he muttered, sitting up and running his hands over his face. His eyes burned, but he wouldn't let himself cry. He didn't want to be weak, not now. He stood up, walked over to his dresser, and opened the top drawer where the old photos of them were. He pulled out one of him and Emily at Lake Travis, Leela with ice cream on her cheek, Noah with a toy tractor. Mark stared at the photo, trying to find some hint in Emily's face that she could do something like this. But there was only her smile, the one that always made his heart skip a beat. He threw the photo back into the drawer and closed it with a loud bang. His thoughts returned to the correspondence. "Make up an excuse for Mark," Ryan wrote, and Emily replied, "Why should I risk it?" It sounded like she'd at least thought about it. She might not have gone to see him, but the fact that she hadn't ended the conversation right away was killing Mark. He remembered her coming home late a few weeks ago, laughing that the team had screwed up again. He'd warmed up her dinner, kissed her forehead, not even realizing that she'd probably been texting Ryan on the way home. "Daddy?" Leela's quiet voice came from behind the door. Mark jumped, not noticing her entry. She stood there in her unicorn pajamas, clutching a book about dinosaurs, her eyes sleepy but alert. "Leela, what are you doing?" Mark tried to smile, although his face seemed wooden. "It's late, honey." "You didn't come to read," she said, coming closer. You promised about dinosaurs. Mark cursed under his breath. He'd forgotten. Sorry, honey. I got a little distracted. Let's do it now. Leela nodded, but her gaze slid around the room, as if she were searching for something. Where's Mom? She asked, her voice a little quieter. She's not in bed. Mark swallowed, trying to think of an answer that wouldn't scare her. Mom's downstairs, resting, he said, trying to sound calm. She's just tired from work. She's always tired, Leela frowned, sitting down on the bed next to him. But she doesn't sleep on the couch. Did you have a fight? Mark felt his heart clench. Leela had always been too sensitive for a 9-year-old. He patted her head, trying not to show how he was feeling. No, honey, we weren't fighting. It's just, adults sometimes want to be alone. It's okay. Leela looked at him doubtfully, but nodded. Okay, but will you read it? Of course. Mark took the book from her hands, opening to the page with the T-Rex. He began to read, trying to put enthusiasm into his voice, but his mind was elsewhere. Leela leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and Mark felt his anger recede a little. For her sake, for Noah's, he had to control himself. But how? By the time he finished the chapter, Leela was almost asleep. He gently laid her down in her room, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. Returning to the bedroom, he lay down again, but sleep did not come. He tossed and turned, turning over every word of the correspondence in his head. You are too self-confident, Emily wrote. It was playful, almost flirtatious. She didn't say, stop it, or block him. She kept going. Why? He stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the dark yard. The neighbor's lawn mower had long since stopped, and the street was empty except for the streetlights, which cast yellow circles on the asphalt. He remembered when he and Emily had bought this house 10 years ago, how excited they'd been to have their own little corner of Austin, with a big backyard for the kids. They'd dreamed of barbecues with friends, of Christmas with a tree in the living room, of Leela and Noah running around in the grass. Now it all seemed like a set, hiding a lie. Mark walked back to the bed, but instead of lying down, he sat up and opened his phone. He went online, typed in Ryan, and the name of the startup Emily worked for. A few clicks later, he found him Ryan Keller, a developer with a profile full of photos of him at the gym and at bars on 6th Street. His smile was as smug as the one in the selfie. Mark felt his fists clench again. He wanted to text him, demanding an explanation, but he stopped. What good would that do? He turned off his phone and tossed it on the nightstand. Morning came too quickly. Mark woke to the sound of his alarm, although it seemed like he hadn't slept at all. His head was heavy, his eyes were burning, as if after a sandstorm. He stood up, stretched, feeling his whole body ache with tension. He went downstairs, expecting to see Emily at the kitchen table, as usual, with coffee and toast, making breakfast for the children. But she wasn't there. The sofa in the living room was empty, the blanket neatly folded. He looked into the kitchen and saw her, sitting at the table, her eyes red from crying, still in the pajamas she must have put on last night. Her hair was disheveled and her face was pale, as if she hadn't slept either. Good morning, she said quietly, her voice hoarse. She tried to smile, but it looked pathetic. Mark didn't answer. He went to the coffee maker and poured himself a cup, though his hands were still shaking. He felt her eyes on him, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her. Leela came downstairs, her footsteps loud, as if she was stamping her feet to attract attention. Whose attention? Mom, are you sick? She asked, stopping in the doorway. She looked at Emily, then at Mark, her eyes full of questions. Emily forced her smile wider. No, honey, I just didn't get enough sleep. Go get some cereal. I'll help you in a minute. Leela nodded, but her gaze lingered on Mark. He knew she was feeling something. He wanted to tell her it would be okay, but the words caught in his throat. He just watched her get the bowl, and Emily got up to pour her some milk. Their morning routine continued, but it was different. Morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the floor where Leela's cereal crumbs still lay. Mark Thompson stood at the sink, mechanically loading dishes into the dishwasher, though his mind was elsewhere. The coffee in his mug had gone cold, and he didn't even notice Emily quietly leaving the kitchen, leading Leela and Noah upstairs to get them ready for school. Their morning routine, usually so smooth, felt taut today, like a string about to snap. Mark felt her eyes on him as she passed, but he didn't look up. He didn't know how to talk to her after the fight last night, after those texts that were still burning in his mind. He pulled his phone out of his jeans pocket, opened his contacts, and settled on the name Jake. His older brother, a contractor, had always been the one Mark turned to when life got too complicated. Jake was straightforward, sometimes to the point of rudeness, but his advice always helped Mark see things clearly. Today, Mark needed that more than ever. He pressed call, listening to the dial tone until a familiar, raspy voice answered. "Hey, Mark, what's up?" Jake said, his voice laced with morning cheerfulness. "You don't usually call at 7 in the morning." "Jake," Mark swallowed, his voice rough from a sleepless night. "I need to talk. It's about Emily." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Mark could almost see Jake frowning in his truck. "What did she do?" he asked, his tone growing serious. Mark walked into the living room, away from the kitchen where the kids might overhear. He sat down on the couch, still feeling the chill from last night, when he discovered Emily's text messages to Ryan. "I found messages on her phone," he began, trying to keep his voice even. "From some guy from work, Ryan. They've been flirting for weeks. He sent her a shirtless photo, Jake, and she was texting him back, playing along." "Damn," Jake breathed. "This is serious, bro. What's with the messages? She's basically saying she wants to be with him." "No," Mark shook his head, even though Jake couldn't see him. "She doesn't write anything like that, but she doesn't stop him. He calls her over, tells her to make up an excuse for me, and she says something like, 'You're too confident.' Like it's a game, and I don't know what to think." "Okay, let's take this one step at a time," Jake said, his voice firmer as if he'd switched into problem-solving mode. "Have you talked to her about this?" "Yeah, yesterday." Mark gripped the phone tighter. "She swears it was just flirting, that she didn't mean to do anything. Said she was shocked by the photo, that she didn't ask him. But shit, Jake, how can I trust her? She's been texting that jerk for weeks, and I had no idea." "And what do you feel?" Jake asked, his voice unusually soft. "I mean, besides wanting to strangle this Ryan guy." Mark chuckled, but it was bitter. "I want to beat the shit out of him," he admitted. "I found him on social media. He's the typical smug asshole, pictures from the gym, from the bars on 6th Street. I picture myself walking up to him with a wrench and smashing his damn car." Hey, slow down," Jake cut him off, his tone stern. "You're not doing anything like that, Mark. You've got Leela and Noah. You want them visiting their dad in prison. Don't let anger destroy your family, okay?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, but I can't get it out of my head. Every word she said in those messages was like a knife. She says she loves me, but how can I trust her? What if she was just waiting for the right moment?" "Listen," Jake said, and Mark heard him sip something, probably coffee, from his ever-present thermos. "You're not going to know the truth until you give her a chance to explain herself. Not just yell at her, but listen. Maybe she was being stupid, but she didn't cross the line. Or maybe there's more to it. But you're not going to know until you talk to her calmly." Calmly, Mark almost laughed. "Jake, I can barely control myself. I look at her, and I either want to hug her, or, I don't know, leave and never come back." "I understand," Jake said. "But you can't just run away. You have kids, Mark. Leela's starting to notice, right?" Mark nodded, though his brother couldn't see him. "Yeah, she asked us yesterday why we were screaming. I told her it was okay, but she's sensitive. She knows something's wrong." "Exactly," Jake said. "For her and Noah's sake, you need to figure this out. Don't do anything stupid until you know the whole picture. Talk to Emily. Ask her what she wanted with this Ryan guy. Maybe she was just looking for attention because well, maybe you were overlooking something too. Me? Mark frowned, his voice sharpening. Is it my fault she's flirting with someone else? I'm not saying it's your fault, Jake replied, his voice firm but calm. I'm saying that marriage takes two people. Maybe she was feeling lonely and you didn't notice. I don't know, brother. I'm not in your bedroom. But you're not going to solve this by just being angry. Mark paused, processing his brother's words. He knew Jake was right, but that didn't make it hurt any less. He remembered how in recent months he and Emily had rarely talked about anything but the kids and the bills. Their evenings had been filled with routine. Leela's homework, Noah's games, her stories about work, his complaints about the contractors. When was the last time they just sat and laughed like they used to? He couldn't remember. Okay, he said finally. I'll talk to her. But if she's lying, you'll figure it out, Jake interrupted. But don't assume the worst until you know. And Mark, keep your cool. No wrenches, okay? Got it, Mark smiled weakly. Thank you, Jake. You're welcome, the brother replied. Call if anything happens. And don't check her phone again, okay? That'll only make things worse. Mark ended the call and put the phone down on the couch. He could hear Leela and Noah upstairs getting ready for school. Emily was saying something to them, her voice strained with cheerfulness. Mark stood up, walked to the window, and looked out. His neighbor, Mr. Kelly, was watering the lawn, and the school bus was pulling up to the corner. Everything seemed so normal, so familiar. But inside, Mark was seething. He decided to check Ryan's social media again. He opened the app, found his profile Ryan Keller, a developer at Emily's startup. Photos from the gym, from bars on 6th Street, with a cocktail in hand and the same smug grin. Mark felt his fists clench. He imagined walking up to this Ryan, grabbing him by the collar, demanding an explanation. But Jake's words echoed in his head, "Don't do anything stupid." Dad, Noah's voice came from the hallway. The boy ran into the living room, his Spider-Man backpack slung over one shoulder. I can't find my sneakers. Mark forced a smile. They're under the couch, mate. You left them there yesterday. Noah dove under the couch, pulling out his sneakers with a triumphant cry. Found them, he looked at Mark, his eyes shining. Are you taking us to the bus? Sure, Mark said, though his voice was dull. He looked up the stairs, where Emily had appeared with Leela. Emily was holding her daughter's backpack, her face pale, her eyes red. She looked at Mark, but he looked away. Come on, guys, Emily said, her voice too cheerful. The bus isn't waiting. Mark took Noah's hand, feeling the small fingers squeeze his palm. They walked outside, where the school bus was already honking. Leela and Noah ran toward him, shouting, Bye, Dad! Bye, Mom! Mark waved at them, but his eyes were fixed on Emily. She stood next to him, her arms crossed, as if she were defending herself. Mark, she began quietly as the bus pulled away. We need to talk. Not now, he snapped, his voice sharp. I have to go to work. You can't just leave, her voice cracked. Please, Mark. He turned to face her, his eyes cold. I don't know what to say, Emily. Do you want to talk? Fine, but not now. I need to think. He walked to his truck without looking back. He heard Emily calling his name, but he didn't stop. The anger was still raging inside him, mixed with pain and fear. Jake was right. He had to listen to her. But how, when every word she said seemed like a lie? He started the engine and drove away, leaving her standing on the porch alone. The day was slow, like molasses leaking from a can. Mark Thompson sat in his office on a construction site in East Austin, staring at the bridge plans he had to check by tomorrow morning. Usually, work calmed him, the numbers, the lines, the calculations, giving him a sense of control he missed at home. But today, he couldn't focus. Every few minutes, his eyes would flicker to his phone on his desk, and the words in Emily's text messages to Ryan would pop into his head. You are too self-confident, she wrote, sounding like she was enjoying the game. Mark squeezed the pen so hard it cracked and cursed as he threw it in the trash. He hadn't spoken to Emily since he'd left her on the porch that morning. Her tearful voice still rang in his ears. "We need to talk." He knew he should give her a chance to explain, like Jake had advised. But every time he pictured her having this conversation, his anger flared up all over again. How could she? Why was she seeking attention from some smug jerk when they had a family, a home, 12 years together? By the end of the workday, Mark decided he couldn't avoid her any longer. He had to know the truth, even if it crushed him. He sent a message to Emily. "I'll be home by 7. We'll talk when the kids go to bed." The answer came almost immediately. "Okay, I'm waiting." Briefly, without a hint of emotion. This only increased his anxiety. By the time he parked the truck outside the house, the sun had set, and the windows of their house on Westgate Drive were glowing a warm yellow. Mark walked through the side door that led into the kitchen and immediately heard Noah and Leela laughing in the living room. They were playing some kind of board game, judging by the sounds of the blocks falling and Leela's indignant cries of, "That's not fair." Emily was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up when he walked in, her face tense, but she tried to smile. "Hi," she said quietly, her voice cautious. "Pizza's in the oven, if you want it. I thought the kids might like it." "Thanks," Mark said, his voice just as tight. He dropped his backpack on a chair and walked to the fridge to get a beer. He could feel her eyes on him, but he didn't look at her. Not now. "Dad," Noah burst into the kitchen, his curly hair bouncing. "Leela's cheating. She moved my piece." "I'm not cheating." Leela appeared next, her hands on her hips. "You just don't know how to play, Noah." Mark forced himself to smile, even though his mind was elsewhere. "Okay, guys, no fighting. Noah, show me your thing. We'll figure it out." He walked into the living room, where the kids immediately pulled him into their game. Leela explained the rules as seriously as if it were a chess game, and Noah kept trying to steal her dice. Mark played the game automatically, his smile forced, but the kids didn't notice. Emily watched from the kitchen, her hands hovering over the cutting board. He could feel her eyes on him, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her. Dinner passed in an odd silence. Leela chatted about school. Noah talked about his new friend who brought a hamster to class, but Mark and Emily barely spoke. She handed him the pizza. He thanked her, but their conversations were short, as if they were afraid to touch something fragile. After dinner, Emily put the kids to bed, and Mark stayed downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with a half-drunk beer. He heard her reading Noah a story, her voice soft, soothing. It reminded him of the mother she had been, the wife she had been, before all this. When Emily finally came down, she looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She sat down across from Mark, her hands fiddling nervously with the hem of her t-shirt. "They're asleep," she said quietly. "We can talk." Mark nodded, his fingers tightening around the beer bottle. He looked at her, trying to find words that wouldn't sound accusatory. Jake was right, he had to hear her out. But it was damn hard. "Okay," he said, his voice even but tight. "I want to know the truth, Emily. Why were you texting this Ryan guy? Why were you flirting with him?" Emily swallowed, her eyes dropping to the table. She was silent for a few seconds, as if gathering her strength. I don't know how to explain it so you'll understand," she began, her voice quiet. "It wasn't about him, Mark. It was about me." "About you?" Mark frowned, his voice sharpening. "What does that mean? You wanted him? You wanted something with him?" "No." She looked up, her eyes full of despair. "I didn't want him. I wasn't going to date him or do anything. It was just flirting, stupid, stupid flirting. I know it sounds terrible, but I swear it wasn't about cheating." Mark shook his head, his fingers squeezing the bottle so hard the glass creaked. "Then why, Emily? Why would you text him, answer his messages, play along? You knew what he wanted from you." Emily closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping. "Because I didn't feel like myself," she said, her voice almost a whisper. After Leela and Noah, I don't know, Mark. I became just a mom, just a wife. I love our family, but sometimes I feel like I've lost the girl who came before. The one who danced at festivals, the one who, I don't know, made you look at her. Mark froze, her words hitting him like a cold shower. He'd never imagined her feeling this way. Emily had always seemed so confident, so strong. He remembered how she was always the center of attention at parties, at work, even at school assemblies. But now he saw her differently, vulnerable, lost. So, did this Ryan make you feel like that girl? He asked, his voice quieter but still hurt. Emily nodded, her eyes filling with tears. He was just complimenting me, Mark. It was stupid, I know. But when he wrote, I felt wanted. Not just like the mom who forgets to turn off the oven or the manager who puts out fires at work. I felt alive. Mark looked at her, his heart aching. He wanted to scream that she had always been desirable to him, that he thanked fate every day for her. But he also felt guilty. When was the last time he told her how beautiful she was? When was the last time he looked at her the way he had at that festival 12 years ago? And that justifies what you did, he asked, his voice hoarse. You texted him that he was overconfident, but you didn't stop him. And then he sends you this photo. Do you even realize what that looks like? Emily winced, tears falling onto the table. I didn't ask him to send that photo, she said, her voice shaking. It shocked me, Mark. I was going to tell him to stop, but you found the phone first. I swear I didn't mean for it to go this far. But it did, Mark said, his voice heavy. You let it happen, Emily. You could have blocked it, told it to fuck off, but you kept going. I know, she whispered, her voice thick with guilt. I know I screwed up. I shouldn't have done it. But Mark, I love you. I never wanted to lose you. You and the kids are all I have. Mark looked at her, his anger warring with his desire to believe her. Her tears seemed genuine, her words seemed true. But the image of Ryan, his smug smirk, was still in his mind. He wanted to believe that she hadn't crossed the line, but doubt gnawed at him like rust. I don't know how to trust you, he said finally, his voice quiet. But I want to try. I don't want Leela and Noah to see us like this. Emily nodded, her eyes full of hope, but also fear. I'll do anything to fix this, she said. I swear, Mark. He didn't answer, just finished his beer and stood up. I need some time, he said, heading for the stairs. Good night, Emily. She watched him go, her tears still flowing, but she didn't call him. Mark went up to the bedroom, closed the door, and lay down on the bed, his heart still pounding. He wanted to believe her, but he didn't know if he could. The next day began with the usual noise, Noah's alarm beeping at 6:30, Leela screaming from her room that she couldn't find her school uniform, and the coffee maker bubbling in the kitchen, wafting the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Mark Thompson woke up with a heavy head, his eyes still aching from the sleepless night, but he forced himself to get up and go downstairs. Emily was already in the kitchen, in her work blouse and slacks, cutting fruit for the children. She looked up as he entered, and her smile was cautious, as if she was afraid to startle him. Good morning, she said quietly, placing a mug of coffee in front of him. I made your favorite, with 2 spoons of sugar. Thank you, Mark said, taking the mug. His voice was neutral, but he noticed the way she looked at him, searching for some hint of forgiveness. The air between them was thick after the conversation last night, full of unspoken words, but at least they were talking. He sat at the table, watching her make breakfast. Her movements were quick, practiced, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Leela came down first, her hair disheveled and her backpack in her hands. Mom, haven't you slept well again? She asked, sitting down at the table and taking a piece of toast. Emily smiled, but her eyes were tired. Just work, honey. No big deal. Mark looked at his daughter, feeling a twinge of guilt. Leela was too observant, and he knew she was feeling the tension. Noah ran in after him, his pajamas inside out, and he immediately reached into the refrigerator for a yogurt. Dad, are you driving us today? Noah asked, his mouth full of yogurt. "Sure, buddy," Mark said, trying to sound cheerful. "But finish your meal first." Breakfast was the usual chaos. Leela complaining about math, Noah spilling juice, Emily reminding everyone of the day's plans. Mark joined in the conversation, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the conversation from yesterday, about how Emily had admitted to feeling lost. It didn't excuse her flirting with Ryan, but it made him wonder. Maybe he was to blame, too, for not noticing how she was changing. As the kids ran off to get ready, Emily turned to him. "Mark," she began quietly, "I was thinking about what you said yesterday. I'm going to block Ryan, right now." Mark looked up, his surprise genuine. "Block it." "Yeah," she nodded, picking up her phone from the table. She opened her contacts, found Ryan's name, and hit block. Her fingers shook slightly, but she did it quickly. "There. Done." Mark looked at her, feeling his anger recede a little. It was a step, small but real. "Okay," he said. "But that's not all, Emily." "I know," she said, her voice full of determination. "I'll talk to my team. I'll ask to be transferred to another team. I love my project, but if it helps us, I'll do it." Mark nodded, his eyes softening. It, it would mean something to me." She smiled weakly but sincerely. "I'll do everything, Mark. Everything so that we can be together." The kids came down, breaking the moment, and Mark took them to the bus. When he returned, Emily was leaving for work. She kissed him on the cheek, her lips cool, and he didn't pull away, but he didn't respond either. The day passed in a routine. At the construction site, checking drawings, arguing with contractors, but his thoughts were at home. By evening, he decided to make his move. He stopped at the store, bought her favorite coffee, and left a note on the kitchen table. "You still make my heart beat faster." When Emily returned, she found the note and smiled, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she said, coming closer. "That means a lot." "I'm trying," Mark replied, his voice quiet. "But I need time, Emily." She nodded, not pressing. Dinner was calmer. They talked about work, about the kids, avoiding painful topics. But when the kids went to bed, Mark felt paranoid again. He waited until Emily was asleep, then took her phone. The password was the same, and he checked her messages. Nothing from Ryan, she really had blocked him. But he hated himself for it. Why couldn't he just believe it? The next day, Emily called him from work. "I talked to the boss," she said, her voice nervous. "They're moving me to another team. It means less responsibility, but I did it." "Thank you," Mark said, feeling relieved. "I can see you're trying." "I want you to trust me again," she replied, "step by step." Mark began leaving notes more often. On her mug, in her bag, simple words like, "You look beautiful today." Emily responded with smiles, but their intimacy was strained. They slept in the same bed, but did not touch. One evening, Leela approached Emily while she was washing the dishes. "Mom, why is Dad sad?" she asked, her eyes serious. "He's smiling, but not for real." Emily froze, her gloved hands frozen in the water. "Grown-ups argue sometimes, honey," she said evasively. "But we love each other. Everything will be okay." Leela nodded, but her eyes were doubtful. "Okay, but you promise?" "I promise," Emily replied, hugging her. Mark heard the conversation from the living room and felt a pang. He knew his paranoia was affecting everyone. He kept checking Emily's phone in secret, hating himself, but unable to stop. But her efforts blocking him, transferring him to another team made him believe she was sincere. Bit by bit, they were trying to fix what was broken. Mark and Emily continued to live in this delicate balance. In the mornings, he helped with the children. In the evenings, they ate dinner together, but the conversations were superficial. One day, Emily came home with news. "I've been transferred," she said, her voice. "New team, new project. It's not what I loved, but it's for us." "I appreciate it," Mark said, stepping closer. "I really do." She nodded, her eyes wet. "I'll do anything, Mark." but the paranoia didn't go away. That night, Mark picked up her phone again, checked it. Nothing. He put it back, feeling ashamed. The next day, he left a note on her pillow. "I'm trying to trust. Thanks for your efforts." Emily found her that evening and went up to him. "It means a lot," she said, her voice quiet. "I love you." "Me too," he replied, and this time his words were sincere, although with a hint of uncertainty. They went to bed, and although they didn't hug, the air between them became a little warmer. The steps toward trust were small, but they took them together. Mark Thompson stood at the window of his office on a construction site in East Austin, watching cranes lift steel beams under a gray sky. The morning was muggy, smelling of dust and concrete, and his crew was already bustling below, shouting instructions to each other over the noise of the excavators. Usually, the chaos calmed Mark. He knew every step of the process, from the drawings to the final inspection. But today, his thoughts were scattered, like clouds that promised rain but brought no relief. He hadn't slept well in several nights, since his conversation with Emily and her transfer to another team. Her efforts had helped, but his paranoia hadn't completely gone away, and now it was starting to affect his work. His boss, Tom Harris, walked into the office without knocking, his face grim and a stack of papers in his hands. Tom was a construction veteran with gray hair and a voice that could cut through any noise. "Mark, sit down," Tom said, throwing papers on the table. "We have a problem." Mark sat up, his stomach clenching. "What happened?" "The plans for the bridge." "Worse," Tom said, sitting down across from him. "The contractor we worked with on the last project is under investigation. Corruption, bribes to city officials. They're freezing all contracts related to them." Mark stared at him, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. This contractor was a key partner for their firm. They handled half the materials and logistics. Without them, the leaking bridge could stop, which meant delays, fines, and a loss of reputation. "How will this affect us?" Mark asked, his voice even but his insides seething. "We're losing a major contract with the city," Tom said, tapping his finger on the papers. "One we were counting on next quarter. If we don't replace the contractor quickly, we'll have to cut staff. You know what that means." Mark nodded, his mind already calculating the consequences. Layoffs, pay cuts, maybe even closing the office. He was one of the lead engineers, but the firm was small, and such a blow could sink them all. He thought of the house, the bills, and college for Leela in a few years. Emily made good money with her startup, but he had always been the breadwinner. That was his role, his pride. "I'll call our contacts," Mark said, trying to sound confident. "Maybe we can find another supplier." "Do what you can," Tom replied, standing up. "But be prepared for the worst. There's a meeting with the partners tomorrow." Tom left, and Mark sat there, staring at the paperwork. An investigation was no joke. He knew this contractor, had worked with them for years, but now everything was going to hell. He picked up the phone and dialed a few numbers, but the answers were the same. "Sorry, Mark, we can't take any chances." By lunchtime, his irritation had turned to anger. He went out onto the site and yelled at a worker for installing a beam incorrectly, even though the mistake was minor. The crew looked at him strangely, but no one said a word. That evening, Mark came home later than usual, his truck slamming into the garage with a loud roar. The house greeted him with the smell of dinner. Emily was cooking spaghetti, her signature dish. The kids were in the living room. Leela was doing her homework. Noah was building a Lego tower. "Dad," Noah ran up, hugging his legs. "Look what I built." Mark smiled, but it was a forced smile. "Cool, buddy." Tall tower. Emily came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "You're late," she said, her voice worried. "Everything okay at work?" Mark nodded, but his face gave him away. "It's just the day," he said, taking off his shoes. "Let's eat." Dinner passed in silence. Leela chatted about school. Noah smeared sauce on his plate, but Mark barely listened. Emily looked at him, trying to catch his eye. "Mark, what happened?" she asked when the children went off to play. He sighed, pouring himself a beer from the fridge. There's trouble at work. The contractor is under investigation. We're losing the contract. There could be layoffs. Emily sat closer, her eyes full of concern. Oh no, she said. Maybe I can help. I have connections with some materials companies at the startup. I'll call and ask. Mark froze, his hand tightening on the bottle. No, he said sharply. I don't need your help. Why? She asked, her voice surprised. I just want to be supportive. Support? Mark stood up, his voice growing louder. I'm the breadwinner in this family, Emily. I don't want you calling your connections, especially after everything that happened. Emily paled, her eyes widening. It's not that, Mark. I don't need your pity, Emily, he shouted, his face turning red. I'll handle this myself. She fell silent, her lips trembling. Mark turned and walked into the garage, slamming the door. There he opened another beer, feeling the stress of the day pouring out into anger. He knew he had been unfair, but he couldn't stop. The evenings had become his way to cope. A bottle of beer, then two, until the world became softer. Emily came later, her voice quiet. Mark, I'm sorry if I offended you. Leave me, he answered without looking at her. She left, and Mark was left alone, feeling helpless. The stress of work was compounded by the family crisis, and he didn't know how to cope. Leela Thompson sat on the edge of her bed in the small room with dinosaur posters on the walls, her feet dangling in the air, not quite touching the floor. It was late, the street lights flickered outside Austin's window, and the house was silent except for the muffled voices of her parents in the living room downstairs. She should have been asleep. The next day was school, a math class she hated, and a history test. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, she listened, her ears straining to hear every whisper, every raised voice. At first, the voices were quiet, as if Mom and Dad were just talking about work. Leela heard Mom, Emily, talking about her new project at the startup she'd recently transferred to another team, and it made her sad, although she tried to hide it. Then Dad, Mark, started talking about his construction project, about the lost contract, about how everything was going wrong. His voice was tired, irritated, like the last few days when he'd come home late and go straight to the garage with a beer. But then the conversation changed. Leela heard a name, Ryan. She didn't know who it was, but the name sounded familiar, like she'd heard it before, in snippets of her parents' arguments. Dad said, I can't forget those texts, Emily. You were flirting with him, and now I'm supposed to just believe it's over. His voice grew louder, full of pain. Mom replied, Mark, I blocked him, transferred to another team. What else can I do? I love you, but you won't give me a chance. Her voice wavered, and Leela felt her own throat tighten. Leela slid off the bed and tiptoed to the door, opening it just a crack. The voices became clearer. Dad said, I'm trying, Emily, but every day at work I think about how you could be with him while I'm stuck here. And now this contract, we could lose everything. Mom sniffled. It's not about Ryan, Mark. It's about us. You drink at night. You're angry at everyone. The kids notice. Leela froze, her heart pounding. Ryan? Flirting? She didn't understand all the words, but she knew it was bad. Her parents were fighting, and it wasn't like the old arguments about who forgot to buy milk. It was deep, scary. She remembered her friend Sarah at school talking about her parents. Divorced Sarah was now living with her mom and dad, and always crying. Leela didn't want that. She didn't want her family to fall apart. The voices below grew louder. Dad shouted, Do you think I don't notice you looking at your phone? Are you sure you're not texting him again? Mom replied, Mark, stop it. I'm not lying. Leela closed the door, her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't listen any longer. She felt the world falling apart, Dad angry, Mom crying, and all because of some Ryan. She sat on the floor, hugging her knees, and cried quietly so they wouldn't hear. But the tears didn't help. She wanted to leave, to hide, so she wouldn't have to see it. She stood up, wiped her tears with the sleeve of her pajamas, and went to the table. There was a notebook there where she had drawn dinosaurs. She took a pencil and wrote, "I don't want you to lie. I'm going to Sarah's." She tore up the paper, put it on the pillow, and opened the window. The tree by the wall was her secret passage. She climbed it in the summer to look at the stars. Now she came down quietly, her heart beating like a drum. It was cool outside, the streetlights casting shadows on the asphalt. Sarah lived 2 streets away, and Leela ran, her bare feet slapping the pavement. She didn't care how late it was, how scared she was. She just wanted to get away from the arguments. At home, Mark and Emily fell silent, their argument ending in tears and silence. Mark stood up, reached for his beer, but stopped. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tired. "I didn't mean to do this." "Me too," Emily replied, wiping away her tears. "Let's go to bed." They went upstairs, but when Emily looked into Leela's room, her heart sank. The bed was empty, the window was open, and there was a note on the pillow. "Mark," she cried, her voice full of panic. "Leela's gone." Mark ran in and grabbed the note. His face turned pale. "To Sarah," he said, his voice shaking. "Call her mother." Emily dialed the number, her fingers shaking. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson. This is Emily Thompson. Is Leela there?" There was a pause on the other end of the line then. "Yes, she's here. She came running about 10 minutes ago, crying. What happened?" "We're coming," Emily said, her voice full of relief and fear. "Please hold her." They ran out of the house, Mark starting the truck, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. "How could she?" he said, his voice hoarse. "We scared her." "It's our fault," Emily replied, her tears streaming down her face. "She hurt us." They pulled up to Sarah's house 5 minutes later. Mrs. Johnson opened the door, her face worried. "She's in Sarah's room," she said, "crying, but she won't tell me what's wrong." Mark and Emily walked in, their hearts pounding. Leela was sitting on Sarah's bed, her eyes red and her hands clutching her pillow. When she saw her parents, she cried harder. "Leela, darling," Emily ran up, hugging her. "Why did you leave?" Leela sniffled, her voice choppy. "You're fighting about Ryan," she said. "I heard it. You're lying to me, telling me everything's fine. I don't want you to get divorced." Mark froze, his face full of shock. He sat down next to her, his hand touching Leela's shoulder. "We're not getting a divorce, honey," he said, his voice shaking. We're just arguing, but we love each other." "Do you still love each other?" Leela asked, her eyes full of tears. "Yes," Emily replied, her voice firm. "Yes, honey, we're working on it." Mark nodded, his eyes wet. "We promise, Leela. We'll figure it out." Leela hugged them, her tears soaking Mark's shirt. They took her home and were silent on the way. At home, they put her to bed, kissed her forehead. In the bedroom, Mark and Emily sat on the bed. "We need help," Mark said. "A family psychologist." "Yes," Emily agreed. "I'll find it tomorrow." They lay down, their hands touching in the darkness. Leela's escape was a warning they could no longer ignore the problems. Emily Thompson stood in the bathroom, looking at herself in the mirror, lit by the dim light of the light bulb over the sink. Her eyes were puffy from recent tears, and her hair, usually neatly styled, was now hanging in tangled strands around her shoulders. It was after midnight, and the house in suburban Austin was asleep, but she couldn't sleep. Leela's escape from the previous day still hung over them like a cloud, and even though they'd decided to seek counseling, the tension hadn't gone away. Mark had softened a little, leaving notes, but his eyes were sometimes so cold, as if he could still see those messages from Ryan. She hated that her mistake had destroyed their trust. She walked out of the bathroom, her feet quiet on the carpeted hallway, and peered into Mark's room. He was asleep on his side of the bed, his breathing even but his face tense even in sleep. His phone was on the nightstand, the screen flashing with a notification from work, probably another message about that lost contract. Emily froze, her heart beating faster. Mark was checking her phone secretly. She knew it. She could feel his suspicion. Now, after everything that had happened, she wondered, Why did she have to be the one under the microscope? Maybe he had secrets, too. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the phone. The password was simple Noah's birthday, 0320. The screen unlocked, and she opened her messages. Nothing out of the ordinary at first. Coworkers, Jake, his brother, a few spam emails. But then she saw the name Linda. The message was old, from months ago. Hey Mark, long time no see. Remember our fun times in college? Let's meet up and chat. Emily frowned as she scrolled through the chat. Linda was a friend of Mark's from college, someone she'd heard of a few times but never met. The messages were few and far between, but there was a hint of something more. You're still as charming as ever, Linda wrote, and Mark's reply, Ha, thanks, but I'm married, Linda. But why hadn't he told her? Why hadn't he blocked her like she'd blocked Ryan? Her hands shook, and she put the phone back. But doubt had already settled in her. She went to bed, but sleep did not come. In the morning, when Mark woke up, she was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee. The children were still asleep, and the house was quiet. Mark, she said as he entered, her voice calm but firm, we need to talk. He paused, his eyes narrowing. About what? About Ryan again? No, she replied, placing the mug in front of him. About Linda. Mark froze, his face turning pale. About who? Linda, your friend from college, Emily said, crossing her arms. I saw the messages on your phone. Happy times? What does that mean? Mark sat up, his hands clenching around his mug. Did you check my phone? He asked, his voice full of disbelief. Yes, she replied, her eyes flashing. You've been testing mine for weeks, Mark. You didn't trust me, so why should I trust you? Mark opened his mouth, but then fell silent. He knew she was right. Linda's just an old friend, he said finally. We went to school together. She wrote a couple of times, but I never responded in kind. Fun times, Emily repeated, her voice sharper. That doesn't sound like just friends, Mark. You never talked about her. Why? Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because it was a long time ago, Emily. In college, I had a brief affair with her. She was married then, but it was a mistake. I was young, stupid. I didn't tell because it means nothing now. Emily stared at him, her eyes wide. An affair with a married woman, she said, her voice full of shock. You judged me for flirting in text messages, and you hid it. You're a hypocrite, Mark. Mark stood up, his face flushed. That was a long time ago, he shouted. I didn't cheat on you, Emily. That was before us. But you hid it, she answered, her tears starting to flow. You looked at me like I was a traitor, and you yourself had an affair with a married woman. How could you? Mark stepped closer, his voice growing louder. I'm not proud of it, but it's in the past. And you flirted with Ryan now, in our marriage. Flirted, but didn't sleep with him, she cried. And you? Did you sleep with her? Mark fell silent, his eyes lowered. Yes, he said quietly, but that was once mistake. Emily stepped back, her face full of pain. You judged me and then hid it, she said, her voice shaking. You're a hypocrite, Mark. We both feel betrayed now. Mark sat up, his shoulders slumping. I know, he said. I'm sorry, Emily. Their argument escalated into a crisis where they both cried and blamed each other. But in the end, they sat down, hugging each other, feeling like their marriage was on the rocks. Mark Thompson sat in a conference room in a small office building in downtown Austin, where his firm was meeting with potential suppliers. The room was stuffy, the air conditioner hummed weakly, and the table was filled with styrofoam cups of coffee and stacks of paperwork. Mark drummed his fingers on the desk, his eyes glued to the clock on the wall. The meeting had been going on for an hour, and they were discussing the details of a new contract won that could save the firm after it lost its last one to a contractor investigation. Tom Harris, his boss, sat at the head of the table, shuffling through papers, while representatives from the new supplier, Textroy Logistics, presented their proposals. One of the reps, a tall guy with dark curls and a confident smile, stood at the board, explaining slides on a projector. Mark didn't recognize him at first, but when the guy turned and said, "I'm Ryan Keller, logistics manager," his heart sank. Ryan, that Ryan. Emily's coworker, the one who sent her messages and photos. Mark felt the blood rush to his face, his fists clenching under the table. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," Ryan said, his voice smooth, confident. He nodded at Mark as if they were old acquaintances. "We at Textroy are confident that we can replace your previous contractor without delay. We have excellent connections, and we know how to avoid any secrets that might come to light." Mark stared at him, his jaw clenched. A hint, or was he imagining it? Ryan continued his presentation, talking about timelines, pricing, logistics, but his eyes occasionally flickered to Mark, a small smile that seemed mocking. After the meeting, everyone stood up, shaking hands. Ryan approached Mark last. "Mark Thompson, right?" he said, holding out his hand. "I've heard of you. You're an engineer, right? Must be a lot of stress in that line of work. But sometimes secrets at work can make things more interesting, right?" Mark shook her hand, his grip tight, too tight. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. Ryan's smile widened. "Just chatting. Nice working with you. See you at the next meetings." He walked away, leaving Mark standing there, confused. This couldn't be a coincidence. Ryan at his firm's supplier, after everything that had happened? Mark walked out of the building, his mind racing. He got into his truck, started the engine, and drove home, but his mind was filled with suspicion. Did Ryan know who he was? Was he hinting at Emily? At home, Emily was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. The kids were playing in the living room. Leela was helping Noah with his Legos. Mark walked in, his face tense. "You're not going to believe this," he said, throwing his keys on the table. "Ryan, he's with the new supplier. He was at a meeting today." Emily froze, her knife hovering over the carrot. "Ryan," she repeated, her eyes widening. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Mark replied, sitting down at the table. He introduced himself, shook my hand, and dropped hints about secrets, as if he knew who I was. Emily put the knife down, her face pale. "It's a coincidence, Mark. He doesn't know about us. I blocked him. I haven't seen him since the transfer." "Coincidence?" Mark chuckled, his voice full of skepticism. "There are a lot of companies in Austin, and he's at the one we work with." He looked at me like he knew. Emily moved closer, her hand touching his shoulder. "Mark, please, don't think about it. It's just work." But Mark couldn't stop. The evening passed in tension, distracted, answering the children in monosyllables. That night he lay awake, replaying Ryan's words in his head. The next day the mail brought a letter anonymous, without a stamp, just an envelope in the mailbox. Mark opened it, and his heart sank. Inside was a printout of messages, supposedly from Emily to Ryan. Flirtations, innuendo, even a promise to meet. The dates were recent, after her transfer. Mark stared at the paper, his hands shaking. This couldn't be true. He stormed into the house where Emily was with the children. "Emily!" he shouted, waving the letter. "What is this?" She walked over, her eyes widening as she saw it. It's fake, Mark," she said, her voice full of horror. "I didn't write that, I swear." "Fake?" He looked at her, his eyes full of pain. "Then where did it come from? Someone knows, and it's Ryan, right?" Emily took the letter, her fingers shaking. "It's him," she said, her voice hard. "He's trying to destroy us, but I won't let him. Let's expose him together." Mark looked at her, his anger mixed with paranoia, but her determination touched him. They sat down, planning what to do next. Mark Thompson and Emily sat at the kitchen table late one evening, their faces lit by the laptop screen between them. The kids were already asleep upstairs, and the suburban Austin house was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the hum of the refrigerator. An anonymous letter lay on the table, its fake messages printed on cheap paper, and Mark couldn't take his eyes off it. Emily, her hair pulled back into a ponytail and wearing an old t-shirt, dialed a number on her phone, her fingers steady despite the strain in her eyes. "Hello, Kevin," she said when the other end answered. "This is Emily Thompson. Remember me? We worked together at a startup a couple of years ago." "Emily?" Kevin's voice was sleepy, but surprised. "Of course I remember. What happened? It's late." "Sorry to call so late," she said, her voice businesslike. "We need your help. Are you still hacking? Or, more accurately, cybersecurity?" Kevin laughed quietly. "I'm doing it. What, was the account hacked? Or something serious?" Emily glanced at Mark, who nodded. "Something like that. We have a letter with fake messages from me. We think it's the same guy, but we need to prove it. Can you track down the source?" "Fake messages." Kevin became serious. "Send me the scans. If it's an email or an account, I'll take a look. But it's not free, Emily." "How much?" Mark asked, leaning closer to the phone. "Who is this?" Kevin asked. "My husband, Mark," Emily replied. "We'll pay, Kevin. Just help." "Okay," Kevin said after a pause. $200 if it's just traceability. More if you need to dig deeper. Send me the details via email." Emily agreed, and they ended the call. Mark leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest. "Are you sure you can trust him?" he asked. "He's a hacker." "Kevin's an old friend from work," Emily said, scanning the email on her phone. "He helped with security at the startup. He'll find out where this came from." Mark nodded, but his eyes were full of doubt. After the meeting with Ryan yesterday and this letter, he couldn't relax. They sent the scans to Kevin and waited. An hour later, a response came, an email with the analysis. "It says the messages were generated from an old account," Emily said, reading. "My old email, one I haven't used in years. The password was weak. Someone hacked it." Mark leaned closer. "Someone? Ryan?" "Kevin is tracking the IP," she replied. "Let's wait." The next day, Kevin called. "It was an IP from Austin," he said, "associated with Ryan Keller's account. He used your old password. Emily probably guessed it or hacked it. He fudged the dates, but there's a trail." "Thank you, Kevin," Emily said, her voice firm. "Send the bill." They ended the call, and Mark looked at her. "It's proof," he said, "but not enough for the police." "I know," Emily replied. "I need to meet him. Record the conversation. Let him confess." Mark froze. "Date him? Are you crazy?" "No," she said, her eyes flashing. "In a cafe in public. I'll say I want to talk and record it on my phone. You'll be nearby. If he confesses, we'll have proof." Mark shook his head. "It's dangerous, Emily. He's manipulative." "But this is our chance," she replied. "I won't let him destroy us." Mark agreed after much debate. They planned. Emily would text Ryan from a new number, saying she wanted to meet. The meeting would be at Bean's on 6th Street, Saturday afternoon. Mark would be at the next table, wearing a hat and glasses so he wouldn't be recognized. On Saturday, Mark sat in the cafe, his heart pounding. Ryan arrived first, sat at a table by the window, his smile cocky. Emily walked in, her phone in her pocket recording. "Ryan," she said, sitting up, "why are you doing this?" "What am I doing?" he asked, his voice innocent. "The letter, the forgeries," she replied. "You hacked my account." "Why?" Ryan chuckled. "You rejected me, Emily. I thought your husband should know the truth." "The truth," she said, her voice firm. "You faked it. You lost Ryan because I chose my family." Ryan leaned closer. "Are you sure? I could make this worse." Mark sat nearby, his fists clenched, but he didn't intervene. Emily stood up, her voice cold. "I have a recording, Ryan. Leave us alone." She left and Mark followed. Their plan worked. Leila Thompson walked down the hallway at school, her unicorn backpack slung over her shoulder and clutching the math book she hated. It was a normal day at school classes, recess, chatting with her friends about the new cartoon series. But when she got to her locker, two girls from her class, Emma and Jessica, were standing there, whispering and giggling. Leela smiled at them, but their eyes were strange, mocking. "Hey, Leela," Emma said, her voice sweet but false. "I heard your mom likes to flirt with guys at work. My mom saw my parents on the chat." Leela froze, her cheeks flushing. "What?" she whispered. "It's not true." Jessica laughed. "It's true. It said she was texting someone to Ryan. Like, scam messages. Does your dad know?" Leela felt tears welling up in her eyes. She knew the name Ryan, she'd heard it in her parents' fights. But now everyone knows it. She turned and ran to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and cried. Why was everyone talking about her mom? Why was this on her parents' chat? At home after school, Leela burst through the door, dropped her backpack, and ran to her room, slamming the door. Emily, who was in the kitchen making sandwiches, heard the noise and frowned. "Leela," she called, climbing the stairs. "What's wrong, dear?" Leela sat on her bed, her face wet with tears. "Everyone at school is talking about you," she shouted. "About you flirting with someone named Ryan. Emma and Jessica said they saw your parents in the chat room." Emily froze in the doorway, her heart sinking. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Mila, I'm so sorry. This, this is a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. Leela looked at her, her eyes full of pain. "They teased me. They said you were cheating on Daddy." Emily sat down next to her, hugging her daughter. "It's not true, Leela. I didn't cheat. It was a mistake, but Dad and I are working it out." Leela pulled away. "Then why does everyone know? Why are you fighting?" Emily sighed, her eyes filling with tears. "Someone spread rumors, but we love each other, Mill. Everything will be okay." Mark came home early, his pickup truck squealing to a stop outside the garage. He heard Leela crying from the room and ran up the stairs. "What happened?" he asked as he walked in. Seeing Leela's tears and Emily's face, he understood. "Rumors at school," Emily said quietly, "in the parent chat." Mark clenched his fists. "Damn," he muttered. "Leela, honey, who told you?" Leela said, her voice breaking into sobs. Mark hugged her, his face full of rage. "It's not your fault," he said. "We'll sort it out." That evening, after the kids were asleep, Mark and Emily sat in the living room. Emily opened the parent chat on her phone and found a post from a mom. "I heard Emily Thompson is flirting at work. Feel bad for Mark and the kids." The comments were full of gossip. "It's Ryan," Emily said, her voice full of anger. "He's spreading this." Mark nodded. "We can't ignore it. Leela is being teased. Maybe we should transfer her to another school." Emily shook her head. "No, that's running away. Let's go to the parent-teacher conference. Tell us our side." Mark looked at her. "Shall we tell you about flirting?" "Not details," she replied. "That our marriage has been through a crisis, but we're working on it. Maybe that will stop the rumors." Mark paused, then nodded. "Okay, for Leela." At a school assembly in a hall full of parents, Mark and Emily stood up when it was their turn. Emily spoke first. "We know about the rumors," she said, her voice shaking. "It hurts, especially for our children, but our marriage is our business." Mark added, "We've been through a crisis, but we're working through it. Don't judge without knowing the truth. Our marriage is our business, and we're not going to let rumors break us." The room fell silent. Some nodded, others whispered. One mother said, "I second that. Everyone has problems." But another, "That's not an excuse." After the meeting, the rumors died down, but not all of them. Leela returned to school and the teasing stopped, but Emily felt ashamed. Mark felt protective. Emily Thompson woke to the sound of her phone's alarm, which she'd set to vibrate so as not to wake Mark or the kids. It was 5:30 a.m., and it was still dark outside their suburban Austin home, with only the faintest light from the streetlights filtering through the blinds. She got out of bed quietly, her muscles aching from last night's run, but it was a pleasant ache, a reminder that she was doing something for herself. She pulled on sneakers, sweatpants, and a jacket, pulled her hair into a ponytail, and tiptoed out of the room. Downstairs in the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water, ate a banana, and went outside. The morning was cool, with a slight mist hanging over her neighbors' lawns, and she began to jog down the familiar street, her breath steaming in the air. It was her third week of training. She'd signed up for the Austin Marathon in 3 months, figuring it would help her regain her confidence. Not from compliments from Ryan or anyone else, but from her own efforts. After everything that had happened, the flirting, the fights, the fake emails, the rumors at Leela's school, she felt like she'd lost a part of herself. Being a mom and a wife was great, but she wanted to be more than that. She ran through the park near her house, where paths wound through the trees, and her thoughts flowed freely. She remembered how in college she had run every day to relieve the stress of exams, how it made her stronger. Now, after Leela and Noah were born, her body had changed a few extra pounds, stretch marks she hid under her clothes. But running gave her back control. She increased the distance gradually, 5 kilometers, now 8. Her goal, a 42-kilometer marathon. It was scary, but exhilarating. When she returned home an hour later, she was sweaty but full of energy. Mark was already awake, standing in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, his eyes sleepy. "Running again?" he asked, pouring her a glass of water. His voice was neutral, but with a hint of irritation. "Yes," she replied, wiping away the sweat with a towel. "It helps, Mark. I feel better." "You leave every morning," he said, setting his mug on the table. "The kids wake up, asking where Mommy is. I don't mind, but it's a lot of time." Emily looked at him, her breathing still heavy. "I know," she said, "but this is for me. After everything, I need this. To feel strong again." Mark nodded, but his face was tense. "Okay, just don't forget about us." She came closer and touched his hand. "I won't forget. Thank you for understanding." The day passed in a routine. Emily at work on a new team, where everything was duller but calmer without Ryan. Mark at a construction site, struggling with contract delays. In the evening, they had dinner, played with the kids, and Emily went to bed early again to get up for a run. The next morning, Mark woke up to her alarm clock, which she had forgotten to turn off. He turned around and saw her getting dressed. "Wait," he said, sitting down. I'll go with you." Emily froze, her eyes widening. "Seriously? You hate running?" "I hate it," he replied, standing up and getting an old pair of sneakers out of the closet. "But if it's important to you, I'll try." She smiled, her eyes shining. "Okay, but don't complain if you fall behind." They walked out together, the sky gray with the first rays of sun. Mark began to jog next to her, his breathing quickly becoming heavy. "Damn, this is hard," he said after 5 minutes, sweating. "Hang in there," Emily replied, her steps even. "It's a habit." They ran in silence at first, but then Mark asked, "Why a marathon? Why now?" Emily slowed her pace so he could keep up. "Because I lost myself, Mark. After the kids, after work, I just felt like a mom. Not the Emily I used to be. Running brings that back." Mark nodded, his breathing ragged. "I didn't notice," he said. "Sorry." "It's not just your fault," she said. "I didn't say. But now, I want to be stronger. For us." They reached the park and Mark stopped, hunched over. "Okay, I give in," he said, laughing. "You win." Emily laughed, her laugh light. "We'll try again tomorrow?" "Maybe," he said, straightening up. "You're not just a mom, Emily. You're my Emily." She looked at him, her eyes full of warmth. "Thank you." Jogging became their ritual. Mark joined not every day, but often, and their conversations as they ran deepened, sharing fears, dreams, memories. Emily confessed that she was afraid of losing herself as a wife and mother. Mark that he didn't feel good enough after her flirting. "I was afraid you would leave," he said one day while running along the path. Never, she replied. I love you. Their jogging strengthened not only their bodies, but also their marriage. Noah Thompson sat on a kitchen chair, his little legs dangling in the air, his face red from a rash that had suddenly appeared after dinner. He scratched his arm, whining, his eyes full of tears. Emily stood next to him, pressing a cold compress to his skin, her face full of worry. Mark paced the kitchen, dialing the pediatrician's number, his phone pressed to his ear. Yes, this is Mark Thompson, he said when they answered. My son has a rash, he eats peanut butter, and then this. Can we come over now? The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. Come to the clinic. Sounds like an allergy. Take epinephrine if you have it. Mark hung up, his face tense. We're going to the clinic, he told Emily. Leela, watch the house. We'll be there in no time. Leela nodded from the living room, her eyes wide with fear. Is Noah going to be okay? She asked quietly. Yes, honey, Emily replied, scooping Noah up into her arms. Just allergies, I guess. They got into the truck, Mark driving quickly but carefully through the Austin streets, where the streetlights reflected in puddles from a recent rain. Noah whimpered in the back seat, his rash spreading across his neck. They were seen at the clinic right away. A doctor examined him, ran tests. It's a peanut allergy, the doctor said, his voice businesslike. Severe. He needs an EpiPen, regular checkups, and treatment desensitization shots. It's expensive, but necessary. Mark and Emily looked at each other, their faces pale. How much? Mark asked. The course is about $10,000 a year, the doctor replied, plus visits, tests. Insurance covers part, but not everything. They left the clinic with prescriptions and an EpiPen, Noah asleep in Mark's arms. Emily was silent on the way home, her fingers fiddling with her seatbelt. 10,000, Mark said quietly. With my job, we're barely making ends meet. Emily nodded. We'll find a way. But the next day, the problems multiplied. Mark arrived at work and Tom Harris was waiting for him in the office with a grim face. Mark, sit down, Tom said. The contract is gone. The contractor investigation is spreading. The city is dropping us. We're cutting back. Mark sat up, his stomach clenching. How bad? Your position is at risk, Tom replied. We're looking for new projects, but be prepared. Mark left the office, his mind racing. Losing the contract meant less money, possibly being fired. With Noah's allergies, that was a disaster. At home, he told Emily, his voice heavy. We're losing the contract, he said. There may be layoffs. Emily sat across from him, her eyes full of determination. I have an idea, she said. The startup is offering a promotion, but in Dallas. More money, Noah's treatment covered. We could move. Mark stared at her. Move? From Austin? No, Emily. This is our home. The kids are here, the school, the friends. But Noah's treatment, she said, her voice rising. We can't afford it. I'll make more money in Dallas. I'll find a job, he replied, his face turning red. I'm not leaving. They argued for hours, their voices echoing in the kitchen. Leela and Noah heard from their rooms, but they remained silent. Finally, Emily said, Then compromise. I'll take a temporary project in Dallas, go away for a month. You can handle the kids. Mark paused, then nodded. Okay, but only temporarily. Emily left a week later, her car loaded with bags. The children cried and hugged her. Mark stood on the porch, his heart aching. Call me every day, he said, kissing her. I promise, she replied. I miss you already. The separation was hard. Mark took care of everything, breakfasts, school, dinners. He was tired, but he called Emily every night. How is your day? She asked. It's okay, he replied. Noah misses your stories. Me too, she said. I miss your stupid jokes, Mark. Her words warmed him. Separation made them appreciate each other more. Sunlight streamed through the crowd at the finish line of the Austin Marathon, where the air was thick with the sounds of cheering fans and the smell of sweat and energy drinks. Mark Thompson stood at the barrier with Leela and Noah, his hands full with the sign they'd made the night before. Brightly colored letters that read, "You're the best, Mom," with drawings of hearts and running figures the kids had made. Noah was bouncing up and down, his little fists clutching the edge of the sign, and Leela was waving it over her head, her eyes bright with excitement. The crowd roared as the runners approached, and Mark could feel his heart pounding in time with Emily's footsteps, who were due to arrive any minute now. "Daddy, is she close yet?" Noah asked, his voice full of impatience. "Can I see her?" "Just a little further, buddy," Mark replied, lifting his son onto his shoulders. "Look where the turn is." Leela jumped. "There she is. Mom!" Emily came around the bend, her face flushed from the effort, her hair plastered to her forehead, but she was smiling, her eyes searching the crowd for them. She saw the banner and sped up, crossing the finish line with her hand raised. A volunteer slung the medal around her neck, and she headed toward them, limping slightly but beaming. "Mom!" Leela and Noah shouted in unison, breaking through the barrier. They hugged her legs, Leela pressed herself against her, Noah jumped into her arms. Emily laughed, her breathing heavy. "You're my heroes," she said, kissing the tops of their heads. "This poster is the best thing I've ever seen." Mark stepped closer, his eyes full of pride. "You did it," he said, hugging her carefully so as not to crush the medal. "You're incredible." Emily looked at him, her eyes shining. "We did this together. Thanks for supporting us." They walked to the car, Leela and Noah chatting non-stop about the marathon, about how Mom had run the fastest. At home, Emily took a shower, and Mark cooked her favorite dinner steak with vegetables and a bottle of wine. The evening passed in a warm place. The children showed their drawings, Noah showed off his new Lego tower, Leela talked about school. When the kids were asleep, Mark and Emily sat on the living room couch, glasses of wine in hand. Emily placed her feet on his lap, and he began to massage them as he had done before. "You know," she said, sipping her wine, "this marathon has changed me. I feel stronger." "I see," Mark replied, his fingers stroking her foot. "You inspire me, Emily." She smiled. "And you me, after everything. Ryan, the rumors, the crisis at work. We went through hell, but we came out together." Mark nodded. "Speaking of Ryan, I heard from Tom he was fired from Textroy. Another scandal with a colleague. Looks like he hasn't changed." Emily chuckled. "Karma, but I'm glad it's behind me." They paused, enjoying the silence. Then Emily said, "I've been thinking about helping others, starting a support group for couples in crisis. In Austin, locally. We've been through it, we can share experiences." Mark looked at her, his eyes lighting up. "Great idea. We could meet once a week, talk about trust, communication. We learned a lot after the psychologist." "Yes," she replied. "We'll start with our friends, then we'll announce it to our parents in the chat. Let them see that we haven't broken down." They made plans. The first meeting would be in 2 weeks at a local community center. Mark sent messages to friends. Emily created a social media group. The response was unexpected. Several couples wrote in to say they wanted to join. The following week, Emily received a playful text from Mark at work. "Hey, hottie, what are you wearing?" She laughed and replied, "My running shoes." "What are you wearing?" "My old jeans, but when I come back, I'll wear something special for you." They exchanged messages like they had at the beginning of their romance, full of flirtation and warmth. It brought back the spark. That evening, in the kitchen, while the children were eating dessert, Mark turned on some music, an old song from their youth. He extended his hand to Emily. "Shall we dance?" he asked. She smiled and took his hand. They danced to the music, circling the kitchen while Leela and Noah laughed and clapped their hands. Mark leaned down to her ear. "You still make my heart beat faster, Em," he whispered. She pressed closer. "And you're mine, Mark." Their family was whole, stronger than before. The end. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.